Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 197 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here with our guest today, Gary Harrington. Gary had a really incredible career, stretching from the Marine Corps to Special Forces to Delta Force to the CIA. We're really excited to have him on the show today. And Gary, thank you for joining us on a Monday evening.
Hey, thanks. It's an honor.
I'll start from the top like we do with most of our guests. I'm going to ask you a little bit about, your upbringing and sort of that path that took you towards military service. If you could kind of lay on your origins.
My parents were the first of their families to ever graduate high school. So my grandparents, none of them ever made it out of elementary school. I had one grandfather that was a hobo for a while. So when I grew up, it was poor farmers. And my parents were that generation that, hey, we got to leave the farm and do something different. My dad had served a couple years in the Air Force, and that was the time he met my mom when he was home on leave. And I grew up, it was Western North Carolina. And matter of fact, when I was young, we still borrowed my grandfather's mule to plow our garden. So, it's funny because those skills, I still had relatives with an outhouse. Those skills came back to serve me well in SF. When you go live somewhere in some other country and you don't have all those facilities. But, military wasn't talked about a lot. My dad just did his 2 years in the Air Force. Married my mom, worked for a telephone company. We moved every few years for that. And, my parents were that generation that struggled real hard to make it, improve themselves from, barely making ends meet. I can remember when they used to have to go to borrow $1 from a grandfather to make it through the week. And we'd go up there and work on the garden. And so we could have the garden and a hog and a cow helped get us through the year. But hey, they kept digging and worked real hard, living the American dream. And, we became middle-class family, lived in the suburbs, moved around. I think I was one of those people that was shy. I had a upbringing that I was probably not the most self-confident person, which later probably fired some of my drive and determination to do some of the things that I did. But one thing we were taught is hard work, and we were taught to take punishment. So that all served me well in the military. And, I was pretty shy and didn't think of anything about going into the military till I was in college at a little place called Campbell College back at the time up near Fayetteville. And there was this, one day I was running track. There was this big giant Marine, 6'4", V-shaped, selection officer walking around. He came up to me and I was a scrawny, skinny, thick glasses wearing distance runner. And he said, "Hey, I hear you think you can run pretty good. I'm going to challenge you to a decathlon and you can pick 8 of the events and I'll kick your ass." So I was like, what? I'll pick all the events that I can do. And in the end, I got invited to go to the platoon leaders course up in Quantico. And, I hadn't really thought about the military, but I was a smart ass and I loved challenges. So, that guy started talking about, you ain't tough enough to make it. We exercise real hard. We push you real hard. And I just don't think you're man enough. Well, that was all I needed to hear.
Yeah.
So, I said, hey, wait a second. You're telling me I can go up there for 6 weeks. You're going to give me clothes to wear, a place to sleep, and you're going to feed me. And at the end, you're going to pay me like $700. Shit, I'm there. So off I went to the platoon leaders course. But I got there, and it was the discipline and everything that happened sort of just changed me. I'd been an extremely anxious person, and I had an outgoing, overt personality to cover up my shyness and anxiety. I think in some respects I grew up as like a Lone Ranger kind of guy, but the man I admired was Tonto, the quiet, silent guy, the guy that my grandfather told stories about from his days of hardworking men and hobos. So the discipline in the Marine Corps, I realized that, hey, I can take more shit than most people can take. And I can be better than these other people if I take more. So bring it on, give me all you got. And it sort of just flipped a switch in me, and I became a lot more outgoing and confident person. And from that day forward, I wanted to be a Marine. And upon graduation of college, I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps.
And what year was that you got commissioned?
December of 79. I was one of those people that was on a little bit longer than normal college course of study. So I didn't finish in quite 4 years. I had dropped out for a year. And so December 79, and I began the basic school in early 1980.
And where did you land in the Marine Corps after getting commissioned and going through the basic course?
Yeah, after the basic and infantry officers course, I went to Camp Lejeune, was in 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, did a year as a platoon commander there. Heard about this thing called recon, and got offered to try out for recon. So made it, went to recon, loved that. I got to go to SF scuba school, mountain climbing school, amphib recon school, scout sniper instructor school. I was the second officer to ever make it through scout sniper instructor school. And that was in 1983.
So this is like the green side recon part of the Marine Corps back in those days. And what was going on kind of in the world and in the Marine Corps at that time? I mean, were these like the Libya, Beirut years?
So I was actually the first Marine in Beirut in 1982. So, back in the 80s, let's remember back then, the 82nd Airborne was known as the Jumping Junkies. And, the military, we were all suffering from the post-Vietnam time, and people looked down on people in the military. And in the Marine Corps, Marine Corps infantry, it's high diddle straight up the middle, and there weren't any wars going. And I did take my team, we went out on float to Beirut, wound up in Beirut. We were supposed to do this nice med cruise where you hit ports and have some liberty, do an exercise. But the moment we got over to the med, we charged off to Beirut and did squares in the ocean until it was time to go into Beirut. The first time we went was to evacuate the PLO. And then we went to take some liberty, and then we came back after the massacres in the refugee camps to start the MNF. And we stayed in Beirut till probably early November of 82. and were relieved by the people that ultimately were there for the bombing the next year.
The embassy bombing in '83, or the Marine barracks bombing in '83.
Yeah, Marine barracks bombing in '83. Yeah, and it's interesting because in that time, I was I don't know, I was an outspoken person. As a Marine officer, I had a mustache, which is not you're not supposed to do, but I chose to do so. And at one point, I was told to move my recon guys because we were covering the beach and doing OPs to move into that barracks. And I said, "Hey, this barracks is a sitting target, and we're better off at being out front and doing observation. Matter of fact, if we took everybody offshore and put them on ships, we could put Marines on rooftops doing OPs and accomplish the same mission that we're accomplishing now." And I refused to move the Marines into that building. The new people came in after that, and things changed, and they moved into the building.
I mean, all this, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but it sounds like maybe this was a bit of a formative experience in the sense that an introduction to terrorism against the United States and American personnel, but also sort of your future in scouting out locations where, American forces will be housed.
Yeah, it was, I mean, yes, we had no idea what terrorism was at that time. And right. I'd been trained in rifle platoon and company level tactics. So I could apply them, but here we were doing, essentially a police force mission. And, we still did our OPs and did the basics, but it was an eye-opening experience. And that was the first time, that I'd been in an environment where you actually talked to civilians and mixed with civilians, and you weren't sure, it's like low intensity conflict. Who are the bad guys and who are the good guys?
Absolutely. And then what after your trip to Lebanon, what was sort of the next stop for you as a young Marine officer?
Well, I made first lieutenant, and while we were on that float, I had the honor and misfortune of being put in a position of commander of troops, which is normally a lieutenant colonel on an amphibious ship, but there weren't that many of us on the ship, so so the captain and I had a very strange relationship because I was a first lieutenant, and he and I used to go battle each other because he'd tell me that he wanted me to order the Marines to do this or that, and I would say no. Certain things I'm not going to order the Marines to do, and so it was interesting. But I think that sort of set the tone. I just had this knack always, most of my career, of kind of bucking the command structure somewhat, and it was good practice to do that. So we came back to Camp Lejeune, and my time on the team with the platoon ended, and I got moved up to the training office, which I hated. I'm 26 years old. I'm a distance runner. I've been to Scout Sniper Instructor School, Amphib Recon School, SF Scuba School. I want to be like an enlisted guy and fight. And then he said, "Well, you're going to be a training officer." So I did that. Then the bombing of the barracks happened, and they were getting ready for Grenada. And at first, they said they wanted me to take over and take a platoon back into Beirut because I'd had boots on the ground. But then I think smartly they decided that wasn't the best thing to do, to leave the person commanding that platoon with his own platoon to do that. So I stayed the training officer and eventually found out that, oh, hey, you've been promoted to captain. Now your time in the Fleet Marine Force is over. you're going to go to, you have two choices, Marine Barracks, Adak, Alaska, or Guam. And I said, wait, what is Marine Barracks duty? And they said, well, don't worry, you do that for a few years, then you hope you come back as a company commander and get some command time. Then you go away for staff again, and then you can come back in higher command jobs if you make the cut. But you know, that's not what a 26-year-old guy on an adventure wants to hear, right? So I resigned my commission and thought about other things to do. I actually almost followed the route of becoming a mercenary in Nicaragua. And fortunately that didn't work out. I think I'm glad now that didn't. And ended up being recruited by the FBI and went through their process and took their test till I made it to the point, the final interview, where I'm sitting in front of three guys wearing suits, and they're saying, okay, you understand, and this is in the 80s, you know, it was mid-80s, early 1984, that the job of an FBI special agent is more admin than what you're used to, and it's a lot of sitting in the office, and then you have moments where you do other things, and are you ready for that? And again, I was happy, right, that I had been accepted. And but I looked at these three guys in suits and I said, is that what I want to be doing 15 years from now? And again, I didn't think about the future. I thought, I don't know, I thought about the adventure. And I guess I believed that I had a role in life, and that was to be in combat. Maybe I wouldn't make it out, but I didn't have a plan on getting older, retiring, all that kind of stuff. So in the moment I accepted and was told, you know, I'd be getting an assignment to go to Quantico. But after I went home and thought about it, I was like, I can't do this. So I called them up and asked them if I could get out of going to Quantico. And they said, do you know how few guys we can take that aren't lawyers or meeting certain requirements during this time in the 80s? And I said, I can't help it. That's just not where my heart is. So I bailed on that. Then I went to enlist in Special Forces. Went through a MEP station, was in the process of swearing in, when an officer runs in and says, hey, stop. You can't swear him in. And he pulled out a reg and he said, here's this one line that says, former officers of other branches of the military may not enlist in the United States Army.
No way.
And that's one of the reasons I bailed on the FBI, right? And I thought, holy crap, you know, the rug's been pulled out from under me. What am I going to do? But, you know, I fell back and I started researching, and I found that the Army Reserve didn't have that one line regulation in there. So I went to Reserve Recruiter. Then he was like, hey, you're kind of splitting hairs. I said, yeah, but do you want to look at how you can do it? Because it's not in your reg. Or do you want to look at how you can't? And I said, you're going to go out there and hire some 18-year-old off the street that you don't know, maybe they're a dropout, maybe they're a delinquent, whatever. I said, I've proven myself. I have a career. I've got a good record. So, you know, in the end, they accept me, and I enlisted in the Army Reserve for SF. But to do that, you had to enlist in a shortage MOS. So like, now I'm going to be SF. I'm like, wow, I was in recon and I had these guys, they were E2s and 3s, and they had a little bit of years experience. Special Forces guys, they're E6s and E7s. They've been doing this years. They're going to be like ghosts moving through the forest. they're going to be like this big, it's the ultimate, it's everything. And so I was really excited to become a demo guy or a weapons guy. That's what we all want to be. And they said, "Hey, sorry, buddy, we got all the weapons and demo guys we need. If you want to come in SF, your choice is medic or commo." and I thought about the 104s and the radios we'd been humping around in my time in the Marine Corps, and I said, I sure as hell don't want to be a commo guy. So I signed up to be a medic, and went through the medic course, Q course, medic course, airborne school, and wound up in 7th group as a medic.
So I got to give a quick shout out here before we continue, Gary, to the sponsor for tonight's show, which is Silent. And they make these little Faraday bags that you can put your devices in, cell phones, laptops, tablets, whatever you use. And they have all these different sizes of waterproof bags that can be even used as backpacks, and you throw your devices in there. What it does is it prevents people from coming and reading the electronics that you're carrying around. It's good if when you're going through airports, you have sensitive devices, sensitive information you want to keep protected, prevents people from stealing your data. And you can check them out at silent.com. It's spelled SLNT.com. And you use the promo code TEAMHOUSE, you'll get 10% off your purchase. Again, that's silent, SLNT.com. And use the promo code TEAMHOUSE to get 10% off your order. So, Gary, you hit the ground in 7th group. And, I mean, is it what you were looking for, what you were expecting?
To some extent, going through the Q course, I was surprised how everybody kept saying, listen to the Rangers, follow a Ranger, do what a Ranger does. And I was like, to be honest, I love Rangers. They're great. But my training in the basic school, the officer infantry course, and the recon school, amphib recon school, we were really, really good at patrolling. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure I learned anymore, but applied all those skills. So it was good. And then, the thing that was new to me was deploying and working with foreign militaries. And that, that was a whole new awakening at it kind of reminded me of my first days as an infantry platoon commander, where mm-hmm. You had high school dropouts, and I had a couple guys that had been given the choice of jail or the Marine Corps. So I found that some of those old skills came in hand.
And this is what year that you get the 7th group?
I hit 7th group probably like 85, 86.
So the wars in Central America are still raging pretty hot at that time.
And as a former Marine, one reason I wanted to go to SF was because during my time in the Marine Corps, I did make a little short trip to Honduras, and I did meet some guys at one of those black agency sites, and some of the folks they were training. That's how I almost made a misstep there and wound up working in Nicaragua. But I was so excited because I saw, this is peacetime. These SF guys, they're out there doing it. And if there's anybody that's going to get mixed up in anything, it's the SF guys. And that's where, if you want action, that's where you need to be, is in SF. So I was very happy to get there. It didn't, it didn't work out quite on my own personal time frame of getting in any action. But that's how I spent my time as 7th group.
Down in Honduras?
I made several deployments to Honduras and into Panama as things were getting difficult in Panama. Mm-hmm. We went down there a couple times, got extended there for several months. Once, as people were trying to figure out what was going to happen. And so it was that during that time is the first time I heard people talk about this whole Delta Force thing. And I'd never really heard of it. Now my Sergeant Major Park was on, what do you call it, green light team, the forerunners to Delta.
Blue light.
Blue light. And he didn't care for people that worked for him going out for Delta. But I heard this thing, and everybody that I knew kept talking about, if I get in shape, it's so hard. And we were on a scuba team. I was on a scuba team. Scuba teams are fit teams. We run hard, PT hard. And, but everybody was like, I have to get ready for it when there's time. And I'm just not, I'm not that way. I like challenges. I like, if somebody says it can't be done, I'm the guy that would say, well, try me and let's see. So I heard that they gave a PT test at the old 18th Airborne Corps by the stadium there. I think once a month or something like that. You could just show up and take a PT test. So I didn't tell anybody, and I went and took the PT test, passed their PT test. We probably all know that guys game that system, right? They know what events there are and all that. I didn't know. I just showed up. What do you want me to do? And some of those events, the crab walk and some of that, some of the runs and stuff you do, I had no idea how to do them. But hey, I made the PT test. Then they send you to take all the psychological tests, review your records, all that stuff. And I wound up getting an invitation to come to selection. So, and my SAR major did not like it. So, and I was not successful my first time. And I think it's the way I'm wired. I got really motivated for it. So, I was in good shape, but I started training crazy. And, every other day I was rucking 13 miles with 50 pounds. Then I would go do stairs with a rucksack for an hour. The days not on that, I would run 6 or 7 miles. And I was so motivated to get ready to go that I didn't realize I was putting myself in a deficit. Mm-hmm. I went to that first selection, had one of those days where I've never had a broken compass before, but I had a broken compass. And then my backup little wrist compass on my watch band, when I went to that as the backup, it had broken off, climbing over deadfall. And had a really, really bad day up there. They kept me in, but then like the next day, I was cut. But they said, hey, we like your attitude. You can come back you can come back and try again if you want. I was like, sure. When's the next time? 6 months from now. So I said, okay, you see me in 6 months. And went back that second time, and it's odd. I was smarter. I saw pictures of myself after that first time. I looked like there's a picture of me on a Halloween. I think I came back right before it was the fall course. I was unsuccessful, and I looked like an Auschwitz victim. My neck was all drawn tight. My skin was tight. I looked like an Auschwitz victim. And the second time, I didn't train like I did, and I made sure I ate well, and I went up there healthy and with a good weight on me, and I tried to relax some, a little bit more during the legs, and yeah, it worked out. I made it.
And so you make it through selection and then go to OTC. And I mean, what was that experience like? I mean, what year are we at now? 1990 or so?
Yeah. And well, I got to OTC was, I mean, we talk about training. Um, OTC is, I mean, you shoot more rounds. Well, I forget what they used to compare it to, that each individual shoots as much as or more rounds than a company of infantry does. Something like that.
I've heard like 1,000,000 rounds you fire at
Yes,
OTC.
it was something like that. You know, for the first couple months, I mean, just to get your hands used to firing that much was a lot. And it, I mean, it really hones your skills. I mean, special ops, special forces I don't think it's a lot of super things. It's doing the basics with a very high degree of proficiency. And the OTC teaches that. There's a lot. Yes, you learn CQB and some other special techniques, but as a lot of time is spent on doing the basics of shoot, move, and communicate very, very well. And those are the things that never leave you. All these years later, like in the agency, when I go back to weapons qual, they would always give me a hard time because I don't shoot. Just when it's time for the requal and they want to put me up against some Delta guy or some special ops or ranger guy and try to egg us on to have a shooting contest. But you do the reps so many times that it's just ingrained in you.
I mean, from some of the folks I've talked to, they say like it was the time of their life. All these like counterterrorism scenarios they keep putting you through, and that are challenging. But it sounds like it's also a lot of fun.
Well, it's fun, but you know, one of the things that happens is, I mean, you think you've made the big time, and you know, I'm one of those people that probably put too much emphasis on it. It was being that was all I wanted to be, and you know, things about family and everything else just go away. And by this time, I was married and had kids, but that was what was important. I mean, you think you're going to save the country. You're going to be
right.
When I went to Marine Sniper School, that was the time, you know, the Ayatollah Khomeini was there. And I used to dream about lying behind a sniper rifle and seeing him through my scope and taking that shot. Well, then you go through the OTC and you dream of doing the assault like SEAL Team 6 did to get bin Laden, right? And it's, you know, it felt just great. And I eventually wound up in A Squadron and was serving there. During my time in A Squadron, because I spoke Spanish, got an opportunity to go to, in 1992, to a Central American country where there were some activities going on that Delta was taking part in down there. And during that time, I had a misunderstanding with the guy in charge of that, and one thing led to another, and then I got sent back home. And eventually I got the invitation to leave the Delta unit. You know, then Colonel Boykin told me, yeah, he thought about keeping me, but you know, somebody else down the chain that was more involved with that didn't want me around, so I got invited to take a hike and find somewhere else to live. So yeah, this
was like a personality conflict.
Yeah, it started. We had a misunderstanding on this thing we were doing, and blew into stuff, and probably because the way my personality is, I got phone calls that said you can't talk about this to your wife, to your team leader, or anybody back in the States. You can't say anything. And so I was holding all this stuff inside, and I couldn't understand what was happening because nobody's even asking me, nobody's talking to me. So, eventually I made a choice to talk to somebody that I thought was a neutral person that I could speak to with confidence. But then they felt there were things that they needed to tell somebody else. And basically what I did was I sort of just threw fuel on the fire unknowingly. And a lot of fingers started going back and forth. And in the end, I'm the newer guy. I got asked to go. And it was a devastating blow. I had built all my self-worth on that. And I thought, this is it. All my career, being a Marine, being how I viewed my purpose in life, everything I did was based on that. And then the day that ended, what are you going to do? You walk. Sometimes there's things in life that hit you like that. So everything you believe, you have to question, what do I believe about myself?
Right.
What do I believe about how people perceive me? And, my future plans and goals are gone. So I'm going to have to start at the basics and refigure my whole plan. And it's a difficult thing to do. For me, it was especially hard because now you've got to go find another job in the military. And you go and they go, "How you coming from Delta?" "Wow, yeah, good. We're good to have you." And they, "Wait a second, why'd you leave Delta?" And I never went into detail or tried to make excuses. I said, "Hey, I had a disagreement. I got asked to go. Take a look at my record, and as a Marine and as a soldier, and then judge me on what I do. So if you think I'm a shitbird, whatever, and hey, I'm happy to look for somewhere else."
Did the unit offer you a bit of a soft landing, because this wasn't like an ethical or an integrity issue per se? Did they try to help you find a new place to settle down?
To be honest, they must have. I don't remember how that happened, but I wound up for a very short time going to the center and writing a manual on I think one of the first Sephardic manuals.
Oh, really?
I helped write. Yeah.
At the Special Warfare Center.
Yeah. In 1992.
Because there was, oh man, yeah. So I probably know a bunch of people that you crossed paths with. Some cool people were involved in standing up that course at the time, and there's like a I don't know how deep you want to get into it, but I know there was like a stack of SOPs that the unit used, and that had to be kind of distilled into what Sephardic was going to teach, as I recall.
And I wasn't part of. I think I was dealing more with the language part of it. And,
okay.
And dealing with a secretary there, and we had the documents and trying to get that turned into manual. But then after a few months, I got asked if I wanted to go to Norfolk, Virginia, and work as the Army rep to the Naval Safety Center to oversee the diving safety of all Army diving. So it was a different thing. I was the only Army guy, and I was an SF diver, but here I was with master divers, hard hat divers. There was one SEAL corpsman there, so everybody else was hard hat divers. and we divided into little teams, and we traveled around the world. Anywhere that there was a U.S. military command that had dive equipment, we did the inspections on the equipment and on their program, and some of their record keeping, and did that stuff. So it was an interesting time. A lot of travel involved. I got to go to get qualified in hard hat diving, and was it CR-15, the mixed gas rig.
Oh wow!
While I was there, so it was interesting, and the SEALs wanted me to show up to do their inspections because the hard hat divers hated the SEALs, and they were always extra hard on them. So I did that.
So I mean, you're also like becoming like highly qualified as a soldier between all of your Marine Corps training, SF, being a medic, the training you went through, OTC in the unit, free fall, all this additional dive training. I mean, you were a busy guy.
Yeah, O&I course. I went to O&I course before I went active duty. Oh, so I guess I missed the part that. So I came on as a reservist with 11th Special Forces Group when I signed in, and went through the Q course and all that. But I was honest with everybody and said, I don't plan on remaining a reservist. As soon as I can go active, I am. And so I sort of backdoored the rules. While I couldn't enlist on active,
right,
I did enlist in reserves. I did get qualified in a shortage MOS. And then there was a reg that said, if you're qualified in a shortage MOS, you can come on active duty. So I hand carried my paperwork after I think it was after I finished O&I school, and literally from driving all around the country in 2 weeks, I went from being a reservist to getting an assignment to 7th Group.
I love the workarounds.
Yeah, I got to meet. I remember Henry Bone, Sergeant Major Bone. Well, there might be some people out there. He was the person I had to see to get accepted on active duty, and I was wearing a mustache. Henry Bone was the guy that he hated. He was a very regulation focused individual, and he hated mustaches, and he kept staring at my mustache. And I'd heard all these stories about him, and I said, Sergeant Major Bone, is there something wrong with my mustache? And he goes, well, I think, wait a sec, if you can, just make sure it stays within regulations. As a former Marine, I would expect that from you. I said, all right, I'll just shave it off. He said, I didn't say you had to shave it off. I said, I don't want every time I walk around you staring at me trying to find a hair out of place. So I'll shave it off. I lifted that dive program. It kind of got more known, and then people started clamoring for it and wanting that job. So eventually, I got reassigned to 5th Special Forces Group in 1996, and showed up at 5th Special Forces Group, and in processed, went to 545 as my first 5th Group team, and Terry Peters was my team sergeant. It was a great team, had a great time. And we deployed to Kuwait, did a bunch of training deployments, and just, really cut my teeth on the Middle East. Then got used to working with Middle Easterners. The group commander, who happened to we both know him, have been my squadron commander at Delta, one day asked me to come to his office. So I thought, oh shit, he's after all this time, he's got something for me. So I went up there, thinking, I'm going to get clobbered. But what he told me was that he wanted to lead the way back to an emphasis on unconventional warfare. And, would I, he was counting on me to take a lead role in trying to push that effort forward. And so there was some initiatives that was in the earlier days of the ASOC course, Advanced Special Operations Technique course, and those things. And I started coordinating with the guys in 5th Group that were kind of leading the charge on that. Steve Poteet was one of them.
And this is just to try to dip back into history a little bit, but like this is like it was a somewhat like notorious to the quote unquote like long hair teams and special forces and the guys who did like clandestine things, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, didn't that grow out of the RST mission?
It did. So at the time there was no teams other than the RST that were long-haired teams, right?
Right.
So that, and they were in 5th Group. So we had both teams. The team that worked with DARPA and DITRA, and then the RSTs were the two kind of long-haired teams. And it's kind of odd because 5th Group was trying to stand up its SIF when I showed up. It hadn't done it yet.
They were the last ones.
And well, and it's funny because I showed up. Everybody, oh, Delta guy, you're a shooter, you're an assaulter, cat. You got and that's what you are. But I was assigned to a scuba team because I was a DMT qualified medic. You're never, Sergeant Major's never going to let you off scuba team. And so I said, well, I'm assigned to a UW team and I'm throwing all my effort into that. A lot of people wanted me to try to change and come over. I've been to sniper instructor school as a Marine. But I'm a person, you tell me what my lane is, I'm going to do my best to do that.
And that was nice of the group commander, I guess, to offer some sort of rapprochement after a falling out.
Yeah, because technically, to be honest, that was the same guy that my previous conversation with him was, I'm going to make sure you get kicked out of the Army. So I was. It was confusing, but hey, I was glad for the opportunity. And that's one of the things that drives you, to have had what I had and leave Delta the way I did. I mean, that was a big driver to me. It's like, I have to prove myself. I've got to drive myself to the ends, no matter what it takes, to show that I'm not just defined by getting kicked out of Delta, for a disagreement that happened one time over a long career. And so, yeah, I pushed real hard at everything I did. And it coincided with my first wife and deciding she had greener pastures and that her role was to be somewhere else other than with me. So about that time, after she left, I went to ASOT and I had a very interesting time at ASOT. And I have this thing of when I go through schools, if there's something I don't like, I challenge the instructors. And so I challenged the instructors pretty hard, and they in turn were pretty hard on me. But, it worked out well. And I think I probably built a reputation with some of the things that happened at school as being innovative and maybe having some skills. And so I finished that school. Well, then just like a month later, I got called down to Soxend, and they were talking to me and, about some classified programs that they were wanting to start. So I got selected for that, and I felt, again, that's one of those things that drove me, because I was like, wait a second, of everybody in all special forces and all 5th group and Delta to choose from, I'm getting chosen. So yeah, I was whatever they wanted. I was like, hey, I'm up for it. So off I went to Yemen, and operated there by myself for a while, waiting for a team to join me to do a demining mission. And during that time was my first time up close at trying to do like assessments. Mm-hmm. I was sent ahead of time to work in the embassy, and yeah, I spent like 2 months going through training and getting all the right clearances so I could read all the HUMINT and SIGINT in the various offices in an embassy that hold those. And I was to make that assessment about the security for follow-on special forces teams. During that time that I was there is when the situation in Yemen first started. We're talking 1998, first started to go downhill. The Islamic Army of Aden was posting threats against any Americans. The line that the ambassador had and all the embassy had was, Yemen is a very safe place. Yes, Al-Qaeda passes through here and gets documents here, but they do nothing here. It's the peaceful place. It's like an R&R place. And, Yemen is an up-and-coming Middle Eastern country. Matter of fact, they were planning on Hillary Clinton coming out to visit as First Lady. And, so the party line was, there's a group of like 3 guys with a fax machine that call themselves the Islamic Army of Aden, but they're not capable of doing anything. They're just a bunch of blowhards. Yemen at the time, European tourists used to go there to get kidnapped, because they would kidnap you and take you down to like Hadramaut region and treat you well and feed you and house you. Is kind of like give you good stories to tell. And as soon as the government would access and give them some vehicles or wells, they would let people go free. So I think that figured into the ambassador and the intelligence community's assessment that, hey, nothing much is, it's not dangerous here in Yemen. But during my time there, things started happening. There was a car bomb in Sana'a, out near the German consulate. There were more acts of violence. No big terror attacks or anything, but to me, it was that things are escalating. Eventually, the team that was going to participate in demining showed up, and I went with them down to Aden, and we set up in Aden and started operating in Aden. During our time in Aden, there was a police checkpoint that caught a carload of 6 guys, I think, in it, that had explosives, AKs, RPGs, and a diagram of the little hotel that we were renting to stay in. So they arrested them. Those became known as the Aden 6. Later, like a month later, there was the Islamic Army of Aden did take hostages in Aden at the British consulate, took some British hostages, and it ended in a hostage standoff sort of outside of town. It was a fiasco. The bad guys were in a depression, in a circle. They had the hostages stand with their legs spread around them, and they were firing between their legs. And of course, the Yemen army was not well trained, so they were kind of in a circle shooting at everybody there. So I think a couple of hostages were killed, and not probably some of them by friendly fire. But that changed my assessment. I'm still reading the traffic, and I'm seeing that, okay, it's true Al-Qaeda is not active here, but they have communications here and they pass through here. Now I have this Islamic Army of Aden that has shown that they not only have access to arms and ammunition, but they're willing to take violent action, and they're willing to conduct operations against Western interest. And now they may be inept, and they were truly inept, but in my assessment, all that remained to happen for them to be, deadly would be to either accept operational control, meaning training and direction from Al-Qaeda, or from hosting an Al-Qaeda cell. So now, we're in 1999, and the U.S. had just signed the agreement to allow U.S. ships to start coming into Aden. But again, this, for me, my assessment was all enabled by my past history, but now my time in Delta and learning about terrorism and studying terrorism. And so I think it all helped me form this opinion. The ambassador told me I was crazy. The defense attaché quietly on the side advised me not to get on the wrong side of the ambassador, to do like he and the other people, including the agency, did, which was, shake their heads and say, "You're right." But it bothered me. I was, as time was coming for that mission to end and go home, I was like, thinking, how can I go home and something happens here to Americans lose their lives, and I didn't do anything.
Shades of Beirut.
It was just, it reminded me of Beirut, because like, okay, here we go, the same thing. For political reasons, the ambassador did not want an assessment going out that would stop Hillary Clinton from coming. That was the big feather in her cap. And, but it bothered me to the point that I said, okay, I'm not having success through the embassy, but as an SF guy, I can write an area assessment and send that out through military channels, and then I can get the word out.
Right.
And I'm not violating any rule. Well, I didn't know, because in my training, nobody trains you up that. I didn't realize that the ambassador has the right to see everything that's written and to weigh in on it. And so I sent it, used the SATCOM and sent my report out and informed the embassy after. And that was a pretty major thing to do. It prompted a flight by the ambassador down to Aden, called us all in and chewed us all out. And she said that she would rather run the risk, and she wouldn't let us have our rifles there in Aden. With all this going on, we were pistols only, and our rifles were locked away in Sana'a, several hours away. And she made this statement that, hey, I'd rather run the risk of one of you getting hurt than the risk that one of you would hurt an innocent civilian.
This is sounding negligent at this point. Yeah.
Well, to me, it was, your soldiers, when you're in a foreign country, State Department has the final say.
Right, right.
And so, we went on, I left. Well, that was 1999. Now, after we know now that in January of 2000, terrorists, and I saw the SIGINT that should have indicated something was going on. Let's just say that the SIGINT, if you go back and look at everything that happened, sort of backed up my assessment. Mm-hmm. But in January of 2000 was when terrorists loaded a boat with explosives and they tried to attack the USS the Sullivans. But as they made their run towards the boat, it sank. Too many explosives, not a good enough boat. It plowed under and it sank. And nobody knew about that, but they recovered the explosives and, later in October made the successful attack on the coal.
Yeah.
Then. And by that time, I left Yemen, went back to the States, and then immediately got trained up and sent as I guess I became the first guy to do these sort of classified, go somewhere, do your assessment using whatever techniques that you've been trained in, and some classified stuff. And so I got sent back to the Middle East, and I was in another country. Well, then when the attack on the coal happened, I got flown back to SOCOM to do a classified deposition to go to the Coal Commission.
Wow.
But guess what? I thought the State Department was political. I did not know that SOCOM can be political too, because when I gave you a quote earlier about what the ambassador said about us and our rifles.
Yeah.
And there were 2 points that I made on my deposition. And when I saw the final wording of my deposition, those 2 things were struck out. And I was like, hey, wait a second. In Delta, we do a hot wash. And a hot wash is right after the training exercise. So we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly to make things better. And I thought that's what we were doing for the Coal Commission. And, they did not want to cast any dispersions toward an ambassador or the State Department, because they said, hey, every JSET, every SF team, anybody that wants to get in any country, the State Department has to approve that. So we're not going to send this out.
A deposition, I mean, is a legal document, a sworn statement. I mean, I didn't even know you could go in there and chop out parts of it you don't like.
What's right? I don't know. I know I was pissed off.
I understand
that, because I thought, we're soldiers. We always put the lives first.
And the truth has to be first, even if it's unpleasant.
Yeah, the truth has to be first. So, it was tough, but I went back to my place in the Middle East and kept doing what I was doing. I finished a year there, and so that was 2000, and I came back to 5th Group at the end of the year. And the project I had been doing in the Middle East was in conjunction with the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency. SOCCENT sponsored it, but I was doing some stuff for the JPRA. And some of the guys that worked at the JPRA had been guys that worked at Orange and retired sergeant majors from Orange, and they knew me and some of the stuff I did. In my classified projects, I had some successes, and So I came back to 5th Group. Now I've got, long hair and civilian clothes, and I showed up back at Group. And I just landed. Well, Group happened to be having a change of command ceremony, and it was John Mulholland was taking command. So, I just showed in to sign in and say, okay, I'm getting the hell out of here because I got to get a haircut and shave and, in uniform.
Uh-oh.
Well, then I ran into these sergeant majors that that worked at JPRA, and they were like, "Hey, welcome," and I was, we worked with John Mulholland. He was, at Delta and one of the commander at Orange. So you got to meet him. I go, I can't meet him. I'm in. Don't worry, he's not that way. And they took me and introduced me to John Mulholland, and I guess he put a lot of weight on them and what they said. And yeah, I told him right off, hey, I got asked to leave Delta, but he placed what those guys said about my ethics and work ethic and abilities than, what the paper might have said or whatever happened those years ago. And, he wound up giving me an assignment, putting me in 5th Group headquarters to work in this classified cell. 5th Group was the first ones to have it, to kind of, there was a 3-man cell that kind of oversaw. One thing was the stand-up of the CIF. The other was the RSTs. The other was that other team that does other, works with DITRA and DARPA. And for all the SPCAT programs, we were the ones that sort of had the reins on those. And, I don't know, John Mulholland and I became pretty close. I don't know why. He trusted me a lot. He asked my opinion a lot. We had a lot of heart-to-hearts in his office. I think sometimes to the chagrin of some of the battalion commanders and officers, because I didn't pull any punches if I thought somebody was trying to get over or use the long-haired team, to get away with something. I'd call them on it. And sometimes with the stand-up of the CIF, I go, hey, you ain't Delta, you don't need to. It worked out. And that's where I was sitting in 2001 when 9/11 happened.
And what was that day like for you? And I mean, this is like a pivotal moment in 5th Group history. I'd really be interested in your perspective, what it was like for you, but also what it was like for 5th Group that day and the days and months afterwards.
It's some it goes for general humanity. That was a shock to the nation and to everyone's senses. But being a soldier, being in 5th Group, being trained and having a mission, it had a different impact on me. The moment it happened, I actually was on my way to the Nashville airport. I lived on a little farm outside Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and was on my way to the airport when I heard on the radio about the first plane hitting. I had a little bit of time to spare, so I pulled in this little tiny cafe and went in and turned on their little tiny TV in time to watch the second plane hit the other tower, the South Tower. And the first one I'm debating, could it be an accident? But there's a co-pilot, there's a flight engineer. I'm not sure that it could be an accident. I think this is probably terrorism, but I'm not sure. And then I saw the second plane boom, it's terrorism. And of course, then they were announcing they were going to shut down the airspace. So coming out of that cafe, I should have gone left to continue to the airport, but I knew not to. I turned right and went to group headquarters. And, I rolled in and we started planning, because we didn't know what yet, but we knew that we would be involved in some sort of strike or payback for 9/11. And it was, instead of the panic, we were all just focused. It's like, this is what I've lived to do. All my years as a Marine, all my years as in recon, in special forces, in Delta, now is our chance. This is what I'm here for. And that's what it was like throughout group. It was, sure, we were upset, maybe a little bit angry, but it was just intense focus on what we had to do and getting ready to go. 2 days later, I was on when the first planes flew, I was on a plane to fly to Tampa to help plan the invasion.
Wow.
As an E7. But because I worked in this cell handling the classified stuff, part of that was our, all the SPCAT stuff, which includes relationships with the agency and DIA and all that, which we knew would be a lead effort. So that's why I was sent.
And what was like that when you get down to Tampa and start planning the invasion? Because like some of the stories, and we've interviewed on this show a lot of some of the first teams. Another fifth group guy, Justin Sapp, we've interviewed on the show before.
So I know Justin pretty well.
Justin. Yeah, I'm going to see Justin tomorrow at a charity dinner for Afghan refugees. I mean, some of the it sounds like we were going really into the unknown. That we sent the paramilitary teams and the initial ODAs into this giant black hole, where we really didn't know what was going on in there. And what was it like from your perspective?
Well, I went down there with a young major, just cutting his bones, getting his bones. Chris, what's his last name? It was just SecDef.
Chris Miller.
Chris Miller.
He's going to be on the show next month.
Oh, great. Well,
yeah.
So Chris and I go there, but now let's be honest. I'm a hardened NCO and still an E7 because of the way I left Delta, and we go down there, and I'm a bit of a, particularly if everybody's too serious, I don't like to be too serious. And everybody was serious. And we were initially told, hey, you need to plan for the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time. It's like, what? You got to be kidding me. And, shortly after they say, okay, we're going to scratch off Iraq. You don't have to plan for Iraq. But, as it started, everybody, you imagine right after 9/11, the intensity that everybody had to get started. And I remember being in this big room and everybody's waiting for a meeting to start. Nobody's there to start it. And it's just, everybody's just all tense. So I stood up on a chair and I said, hey, can I have everybody's attention? And, of course, it was all, everybody from majors to colonels, a shitload of them, turning, everybody staring at me in there. I said, now the first thing that we're going to do is, I don't know, because I got no business, I have nothing to do with this. I said, however, I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So, because at the time they were doing that commercial.
Yeah.
And, guy tries to be an expert. And at first, everybody just stared at me. And then after a while, some people laughed. But, we started kicking off the planning, and I returned to fifth group, and then Colonel Mulholland asked me to go with the first guys from 5th Group out to Karshi-Khanabad, where we were going to set up the base. So there was an initial group of 4 of us that went, and it was good because I wasn't on a team, but I got to be in the vanguard to go. And so I'd already established a record. It kind of like seemed like I was always the first person to go somewhere, sort of figure out what was going on, and then prepare for other people or give a report back. And it was an interesting time. We landed in the middle of the night in a light rain in Karshi-Khanabad, and it was the old.
This is
Russian,
Uzbekistan.
In Uzbekistan, and the guy, a battalion commander, had gotten Mulholland to let him go, and he was taken over as the 3 after we landed. Some Rangers were there, maybe some support people, and that it was pretty bare. But they just landed, so the Rangers are out on the perimeter. Nobody knows what's going on, and we land in the middle of the night, and that guy's walking back and forth, and for whatever reason, I guess I'm the senior NCO. He said, "Sergeant Harrington," he goes, "I'm the operations officer now that we're on the ground, and I'd like you to walk the lines." And I was, it's like 1 a.m. Oh, we don't know where the lines are. we just landed. And I had started, we landed. I did what a soldier does. I got my rucksack and got out my canteen cup and was making some coffee and cocoa. And when somebody came running up and said, "Hey, the colonel wants to see you." So, I went there and he said, walk the lines. And I was like, "Walk the lines?" I go, "You can get shot."
Yeah.
We don't have a challenge and password or anything. That's Rangers out there on the line. And he's like, "I don't care. Walk the lines or troop the lines, right?" One of those officer training things you get. And I said, "Yeah, okay." And I walked back to my backpack where my coffee and cocoa was getting ready. And another guy asked me, he said, "What do you want you to do?" I said, "Troop the lines." He said, "What you going to do?" I said, "Drink my coffee and cocoa." And so I put on my Gore-Tex and drank my coffee and cocoa. Then I took off my Gore-Tex so I could get wet. And then I went back and to where he was. And he said, "Did you troop the lines?" I said, "Everything's fine, sir." He goes, outstanding, Sergeant Harrington." Went on from there. Then things built up. A couple days later, I drove from Karshi-Khanabad up to Tashkent to hook up with the agency and to facilitate the agency coming down to the base where we would launch the agency teams out of and support the agency teams. And so I was in that cell that stood up. I stood up that cell to do the fusion cell between the agency and the Army. And of course, Justin Sapp had been detailed from the Army to be on Team Alpha. So I met all of Team Alpha.
J.R. Seeger's team.
Yeah. JR's team and Alex and Mike Spann, Dave, the other guys, Justin. So, I got back, and then the CIA started sending its teams in, and we would oversee the infill and resupply. And then as agency teams developed the situation, then we started putting SF teams in with them to work with the locals. Mostly, and the SF mission was mostly at that point the medical support was key because there essentially wasn't enough medical support, and the call for fire. And, I think the other thing that's always short in when you stand up that many teams are commo guides. So the agency was really sort of raping fifth group and groups in all, taking medics and commo guys to fill out their teams. I remember Rumsfeld was, damn, we're not giving them any more people. And the things started happening in Afghanistan on the ground so fast that just more and more teams needed to go in. And I was frustrated because I'm like, shit, I'm going to miss my chance. I've done a whole life for this, and I'm good. Like the thing at ASOT, is sort of preparing a pilot team. And I had, let's just say I had excelled at some of those actions and activities. And I thought, I need to be on one of these teams. And then they started running out of, the agency couldn't get enough teams. I'm like, well, I'll take a team. I'll go in. But there's no way that you can't. You're Army.
I had someone tell me once, Gary, that because of the mission you specifically referenced, doing the ASOT unconventional warfare mission in the Middle East, that actually set up Fifth Group pretty well to go into Afghanistan as far as like having some understanding of how to do that. And I mean, I guess you were kind of the tip of the spear for that.
Well, it did as far as that part goes, but also, just to be honest, any SF team, we all hated FID, right? But doing FID, whether it was Central America or in Kuwait, where, people don't want to work, don't work. It's a different culture, different work ethic, and trying to get them to do stuff and to do military operations does prepare you for what we ran into there.
Right.
And so, I was pissed. I wanted, and I guess I got bitter, and I was like, well, shit, I just want to go back to the States then, because after I've been there and I set all this up and got everything going, I don't want to sit here and just keep watching other teams, other people go in. Then John Mulholland asked me and some other guys to come with him on his infill, because we had just taken Bagram airfield. So I went in with him, and we were there. And after a few days, it's around Thanksgiving, we'd spent Thanksgiving there on the ground in Afghanistan of 2000. The planning, it started spinning up that Tora Bora was the place where Al-Qaeda had regrouped and where bin Laden might be. So the agency was spinning up to go to Tora Bora, and military was trying to figure out what we're going to do. There had been an ODA 572 that the paperwork to chop them to the agency had been done to detail them, but that mission never came to fruition. They were going to chop the whole team to operational control of the agency, but that mission never happened. So they were there and available back at headquarters. Excuse me. So the agency, when they realized how big Tora Bora was going to be, and that they weren't really prepared to handle all that themselves, asked for that team. And Mazari Sharif had just happened. Span had just been killed. John Mulholland was a bit reluctant to just give the agency an ODA for operational control. And and he had some other reluctant reasons that he was somewhat reluctant. about that team. But one of the guys who was detailed from happened to be orange to the agency, said, well, you trust this Gary guy a whole lot. What if we took Gary with the agency to serve as an advisor? Would you let us have that team then? So whatever, he said yes. And so next thing you know, without the legal paperwork to be detailed, with a handshake, they said, okay, you're now on Team Juliet with the agency, and along with this ODA 572, and off we went to Jalalabad to get ready to go up to Tora Bora.
I mean, that's wild, and this is cool because I've never heard this side of the story, and so many of the other folks that we've interviewed over the last few years. So what was the situation when you hit JBAD and getting ready for Tora Bora? I mean, you linked up with the unit guys?
It was there were a couple people, actually one of the former guys on UN Delta that was detailed to that team. And the unit guys weren't there. So I got to go in ahead of my old squadron. It was just the agency guys and us, and we went to JBAD, and it was real uncertain. The warlords there is one thing. When we first went in the Panjshir, and people that were aligned with Massoud and hated the Taliban and hated Al Qaeda for killing Massoud, you know, they were eager to get into the battle. I mean, look at what Dostum did. But as we started moving further south, that was changing. So we hooked up in Jalalabad. We were hooked up with a guy named Hazrat Ali, and he just dragged his feet. He was reluctant to get involved. And let's be honest, it was the bags of cash that we were ferrying in that did it. You know, but some of that, I got to do some cool stuff like you train for. The airfield in JBAD was bombed. We had bombed it out. So to get the first supplies in of uniforms, arms, and equipment to outfit the force, you know, I called in the C-130s, and they came in low and lapsed or parachuted all the equipment in. And I remember being there, and the Afghans couldn't believe that suddenly in the dark, out of nowhere, these planes come real low, and the parachutes are coming out. And so I actually found myself dancing in a circle with some Afghan guys, you know, holding rifles in one hand and their hands on the other. And, you know, it was exciting times, but it was real uncertain. You didn't know who was who. Warlords were against warlords. We were in a vehicle coming back from that airfield, and my vehicle made it through a checkpoint. And we couldn't speak language. I got through, but then the second vehicle behind me, they stopped. Well, you don't know who's good and who's bad. So they're stopped, and it's not going well. I remember getting out of the vehicle and then taking aim on you know, it's just some dude that's at the with a couple of dudes at the checkpoint. And maybe they're trying to follow orders, but maybe they're going to ambush us. You don't know who's who. And I remember this argument going on, and they had an interpreter, and me trying to decide, I may not be able to shoot him fast enough if he opens up. Should I shoot him now preemptively? But then what if that, you know, I caused that? So it was, you know, it was tense, but then he let him through, and we went on. It took us, the agency, a long time to get him ready to move his people up to Tora Bora, you know, and the delays were horrible. It was Ramadan when we went up to Tora Bora. There were so many things wrong. You had to kick and yell and plead to get them to move up. But it's Ramadan. They hadn't had anything to eat or drink all day. So when it starts getting towards night, they know that food and water are back in the rear. So anything that they made up during the day, they give up at night and go back. Just a lot of problems. I was on an OP. There we had a headquarters element that was in there, and Delta came in later and joined up with them, A squadron. And the rest of us split in two OPs. We were 5 or 6 of us on an OP. I think the SOCOM history calls that Cobra 25 Bravo was the OP we were on. So, hey, we're calling in bombs. We're designating on the base of the mountain where bin Laden was supposed to be. It was really interesting calling fire because we were up so high on mountains, like up on the top, that when you would call for fire down in the valley, 1,000 meters below you, you'd see those the bombs come beside you. You could see them coming in the air to go down in that valley because we were up high on their trajectory because they were dropping at 25, 26,000 feet. And we had, by that time, the friendly fire incident also at Mazar-e Sharif. I had a close call I think it must have been like 2 a.m. I was calling in. There was a aircraft that had like 20 JDAMs on it. So I brought them in first to drop 1 or 2 to see if we're on target. And that went fine. So, he comes out, they roll out, and you have about a 15-minute turnaround before they can come back.
On a B-2?
Yeah, B-2. And as he's rolling back in, I say, that was good. Drop the remaining ordnance, same spot. And he calls back the coordinates, right? But he gives me, because you call for fire, I gave the location of the other OP, but he calls out that location as the target location. And man, I remember my throat jumped in my stomach jumped up in my throat because I was like, did I hear that right? Did I hear that right? What? And I was just screaming, abort, abort, abort. And I pictured, because there was like a 45-second delay, where they would drop. And I was afraid he was going to say too late. But then he corrected, and then he gave me the correct coordinates and dropped the ordnance. But it was
Oh my God,
a big learning incident. But yeah, and we know now, bin Laden got away. One of the warlords, whether it was Hazrat Ali or the one that was affiliated with the Brits that were there on site too, covering the back end towards Pakistan, somebody facilitated him going. And there's a book called The Hunt for Bin Laden, written by a Delta guy. It was a major on the ground there.
Oh, Kill Bin Laden.
And,
yeah,
or Kill Bin Laden. And he talks about the night that the Delta guys went forward and all the locals bailed on them, and they were left, the 2 guys, alone. Mm-hmm. One of them Sean had been on my team in A Squadron. So it was actually A Squadron that came in, my old squadron, with a few people still left on it. And that same night, and this is where I think that the warlords had something worked out with bin Laden. The Hazrat Ali, the chief of the Afghans, called up to his guys that were with us. There were 5 or 6 Americans and we probably had 10 locals with us. Now, we wouldn't let them with us because you didn't train these guys. You didn't know who they were, good or bad. So we used them as tripwires. We were up on this knife ridge, and we put them between us and Al-Qaeda. We figured, hey, if Al-Qaeda rolls through us, they'll hit them first, and it'd be like a tripwire to give us a little bit of time. But he told them that they had to move us off there, and it was for our own safety. And so, our interpreter tells us, you have to go now. You can't stay here. We're not going. He goes, no, but the general said you have to leave. And we're all leaving. And we said, no, we're not going. So in the end, all the Afghans left and left us up on that ridge. I guess that was a point with me because maybe the guys down in the headquarter element didn't get the whole story. But in his book, he says that we moved, that we evacuated. We did not.
Oh, wow.
We stayed up there, and we had movement that night down in the bottom, 1,000 meters below us, where there were some lights and movement. And one of the guys wanted to, light them up, but I was like, hey, at night with your M4, we're not going to be effective fire, and you're just going to give away our position. So, we're not, but we had that movement. So I tried to call some air in, but there was one of the few times in Tora Bora, there was no aircraft overhead that had any ordnance on it. And I was like, oh man, they're moving, and we didn't know if they were trying to maneuver on us. So what can we do? The only thing I found was there was back in those days, the drones were not yet armed. We weren't that far into the development of the war on terror yet, but they sounded kind of like AC-130. If you brought it down low enough, you could hear it. So I was able to get that drone to come in and drop low enough that you could hear it. And then those lights that we saw down in the bottom of the valley, they disappeared. So it did its job. So we left. We left Tora Bora, got relieved by some Delta guys. A couple of them guys I knew. We hiked down the mountain using donkeys to carry our backpacks and all our gear, and just kept our LBE and weapons with us, and then met up with the Delta guys, and then they came up to take over the OP, and they're the ones that wound up pushing further into the mountains to try to get on the trail of bin Laden, after we left. But I got to say, hey, it's about time you Delta guys got here. We've already got most of this stuff done.
I'm sure they loved that.
Yeah, it was funny. Well, and we'd been told this stuff about Afghan culture and what you can say and what you can't say. And it was snowing. When we were up in Tora Bora before we came down, it started snowing on us. Matter of fact, Delta was supposed to come in a day before, and they radioed us and I said, hey, do you have winter gear? And no. I said, well, it's snowing up here, and it's going to get really bad. So they actually delayed, and somehow within 24 hours came up with all kinds of winter gear, that whole Delta supply line, but when we were doing the turnover with them, there were all these villagers there. And so we're talking to the villagers. I got the interpreter, and they said one thing you never can talk about is their women and or their religion. But I couldn't help myself. I said, hey, I know why you guys have 4 wives. You can have 4 wives. And, he's like, yeah, well, what's your reason? I said, because it's so damn cold up there that you need a warm place to stay as you move around. So you can spread 4 out to different places so you can get warm at night. And the Delta Sergeant Major that was there was like, no, don't say that. Don't say that. But I was like, well, it went fine. they appreciated it.
The joke.
Yeah.
So after Tora Bora, you did like a subsequent number of deployments back to Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, I didn't go. So I didn't even leave Afghanistan. No. Yeah. We were in a safe house in Jalalabad. Our team kind of recovering from our time up there in Tora Bora. And the radio message came in, said, "Hey, Gary Harrington, get back to Karshi-Khanabad and see the commander." Well, okay, how am I going to get back? So I talked to the agency and they let me hitch a ride on one of their aircraft. Of course, I had no passport or anything, and the aircraft landed in Tashkent. I had to hide on the aircraft till they went through it, and then wound up getting on I think the next day or maybe that same night, on an agency helicopter going back to Karshi-Khanabad. It was, and okay, let's be honest, it was cool because it was kind of like a movie, because by now when I left, there was nothing. Now there's this plywood headquarters built. I go in there and I walk in, I'm all nasty and dirty, and I go, "Hey, I'm here to see the commander." And they go, "Back there in office." And I walk back in there and, he greets me. We have a talk. There was, he asked me a really tough question about a personnel issue that had occurred. And he said, I got to make some decisions, and I'm going to trust you. So give me the rundown on what happened, So now I'm back in the same. It's sort of like what happened to me in Delta, but I'm the guy that is making the call. But so I talked to him, and then we finished, and he goes, "Hey, now I'm putting you on another agency team called Kilo, and they're going to go to a place called Coast. So get yourself to Kabul, Afghanistan, go to the Ariana Hotel, and hook up with them." That was my instructions. So I said, "Can I shower first? I'd like to take a shower, get cleaned up, repack my ruck." So I did that, and then I went down to the flight line, found a CH-47 that was doing a checkout ride. It had some repairs, and the pilots agreed to let me on it, and they flew me into Kabul or into Bagram. And then I guess I got a vehicle and showed up at this, rundown old hotel and joined Kilo, which Nate Chapman was on. So
okay. Yeah, yep.
I had met Mike Spann and helped Alpha get in. Matter of fact, the picture in the CIA museum of Team Alpha, I took that picture. But now I'm on a team with Chapman and the other guys, and they'd been together a little while. I joined late. I did Christmas in Jalalabad. I did New Year's there in Kabul, and then I guess it was like about 2 January, the infill to Coast. I'm getting ready. I think it was the night before the infill. Some major from group came over to the hotel and said, "Hey, Colonel Mulholland said you're not to go in on the first helicopter in the Coast." And I was like, "What do you mean not go in the first helicopter?" He goes, "No, he wants you to hold and go on the second helicopter." And, I probably had a few words to say about that because I was pissed. But, he's the colonel. So he'd already had to write letters for the guys in Kandahar and enough other letters for people that weren't coming home that, while I wasn't really happy with that decision, it's his call. He's the boss. So I delayed. Well, then the next morning, I'm getting ready to get on the helicopter to go in, and that's when the guys on Kilo got hit and Chapman got killed. So, the medevac came out that had a medic on it, and it was a guy, a third group guy. And, I went back, so dealt with that. And then I went back in that evening to coast, and we were, team was still dealing with what had happened and what we're going to do after. And that's where, the agency is great at what it does. And the Army agency, the 5th Group agency link up was effective, but there are some things, and I think this was one of those, and some of the stuff I saw in Tora Bora, where, I felt that a seasoned special ops person would have made different calls. After Chapman got killed, we wound up changing. We went in backing one warlord, but after he got killed, they decided, well, that warlord isn't powerful enough in coast. The other guy is, who everybody is pretty sure ordered the ambush that resulted in Chapman's death. But then the agency said, we're going to back this guy. And for a while, they wanted to back both. And hey, from that guy's standpoint, it means millions of dollars.
Right.
And so, he's collecting that. But yeah, so we did the infill to coast, but I learned the lesson. I tried to apply the lessons I learned from Tora Bora, that my job, when Mulholland told me that you get there and develop the situation and make sure that this G-force is ready to accept SF SF people to work with it and direct them. Well, now I didn't want a gaggle, and I learned that, okay, one of the first things I want to do is build mobile kitchens, outfit little pickup trucks with, gas stoves so we can cook forward so the troops don't have to come back to get fed. I want to develop some sort of staff structure so that the SF guys have something to fall in on. Because, these guys were, had flowers sticking out of their guns. A lot of them were inoperable. It was a joke. And it's really funny because the guy running that agency team was a former SF guy, officer. And, they kept doing stuff, but they sort of were delaying on letting me get to the job of getting things structured the way I wanted to. And I'm the Army guy there. And they kept saying, tell Mulholland to send us some SF. And I was like, no. And I said, not until we do this. I remember one big team meeting there. He said, wait a minute. So you're telling me you and E7 in the Army telling all of us that it's up to you if we get SF people or not? And yeah, I think I crossed my arms to say yes about it.
Yeah, because you want everything set up to properly receive the team so they can be effective when they get there.
You got to be effective. You can't just jump in on a crowd of people and hope and pray that something's going to happen, because it's not. Right. And plus, I'd given the commander my word that I would make sure that it was effective and ready. So I wanted to do that. But so that was going on, and we agreed that we would send a team in. But by that point, the two warlords I mentioned, it was Zia Khan and Pasha Khan, that were fighting each other, the two warlords that we were backing. And it turned into a blood feud. It was going to derail everything the agency and the Army was trying to do up there. So I went to that one guy, to Zia Khan, and I said, yeah, you come from Orgun area. what if you go back to Orgun and I will take a group of people with you and we'll bring special forces into you and support you, but back in your home area where you're from. So he agreed, and then the agency bought in on that plan. So it was decided to split off and open up a new base in Orgun, and I got to plan and lead the infill for that. And it's just a way different than how I'd ever been trained to run an infill in recon or SF. And I had Al-Qaeda was spread throughout the region. You didn't know if you were coming into what you were going to come into. And, you know, the warlord had a nephew that didn't speak one word of English. And how am I going to make an infill by a helicopter in a place and ensure the most safety we can? So you're inventing it. I trained the guy how to use an IR strobe and what we needed for an LZ, picked out the most probable place from maps and overhead imagery. And I did some dry rehearsals that, you know, to know he'd know how to set up the IR strobe, and sent him back. And they had Thorayas, and we had an interpreter that spoke Pashtun that we were communicating. And so we waited a few days as it got time for the infill. What I told him to do was to go out and mark that LZ at night and to keep marking it every night. And we waited, so I didn't go in. We didn't infill the first day or second day, maybe I don't remember if it's third or fourth day. And then to make the infill, I invited some of his relatives to get on the helicopter with me. So I figured I could throw a few civilians on there, kind of as an insurance policy. I want to make sure you know that I have, you know, some of your relatives on this helicopter with me. And so, you know, we set the pattern of not coming in. And then the one night we did show up and make that infill.
And that was the start of the base, the FOB at Orgun.
Yeah.
Pretty much that existed through like pretty much the whole war.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, it was wild. It was kind of the Wild West. You know, you want to be that guy. There's no rules. There's no other military around you. You kind of run around. We were going out and hitting, you know, I'd say hitting, not hitting. I think I was extremely successful without ever having to hit a weapons cache. Everywhere in Afghanistan had weapons caches from the Soviet war, the war with the Soviets. Every little village had stuff. You would never, ever find it. But, you know, I developed this thing where we'd work with a village elder and an interpreter, and we'd go there and we'd have a couple vehicles with food and blankets and mattresses on it sitting off back a ways. And we just go up and ask nicely, hey, you got some stuff here and it's bad stuff. Somebody could get hurt. We don't want any misinterpretations. We'd like it if you'd let us dig this up or help us, show us where it is. And they would do that. And then after we would recover the stuff, in would roll these trucks with all these goodies before, and, you know, it eventually got to the point you'd be finishing in one village and here's people from another village. Hey, come to our village because we got it. And we started collecting, you know, it just kept getting more and more and more. And, I started paying guys with tractors to haul artillery pieces back to Orgun. And I was like making a collection of big artillery pieces. It was, it was exciting days. I remember when I was in Yemen, the Yemenis during the demining mission had two guys vaporized in a truck carrying a whole bunch of mines, and whatever happened to detonated, the whole truck went and they were gone. And the Afghans would always pick the two lowest guys to drive the truck. And it was, stuff hidden from the Soviet time. It was rockets, it was rounds, it was mortars, it was mines, everything under the sun, under every kind of condition.
That's an inshallah detail.
Inshallah. And the Americans, at first I did this it would be 2 or 3 Americans go. Eventually, and we would ride in a truck and we'd make sure we stayed a couple hundred meters from that truck. Then one day I was, in there, because now music's allowed. They had their little cassette player playing the most horrible Afghan music I ever heard. But they were all excited, and these 2 guys were in there, and I felt bad for them. So I just went up and opened the door and said, "Hey, I climbed in the truck with them." And they looked at me like, "You're going to ride in here with us?" And I was like, "Inshallah." if you go, I'm going. And off we went. And, after that, those guys started treating me different, the Afghans. I would, when we get to where we go, I would help them unload the truck, do the manual labor. And it got to where they took it personal and they didn't want me touching anything. They started, taking care of me and treating me like I was one of their commanders. My experience with the guys in Tora, Bora, was they were so undisciplined and untrained. I expected the same here. We went out to do recover one cache we thought was going to be maybe hostile. So you don't have time to train all these guys,
Right.
So you just let them follow me. So I remember I had them all in the back of a stake bed truck, and I was in the front. My plan was we were going to get off and we were going to cover one ridge. Another guy was going to take other guys in another vehicle and cover the other ridge. And the cache was in the valley. And I thought, okay, all you do is follow me. I'm going to jump out of the front and run to the back. You're all going to come out of the truck and follow behind me. And I'm the American. I'm going to lead the way up the ridge. And I've got all my American gear on and jump off the truck and come back. Well, they're jumping off. They're faster than I planned. And they're all coming. There's this little guy with a big beard and wearing a Soviet officer's belt buckle. And, we started up the ridge and he just started barking orders, and those guys were running up the ridge, and I'm carrying 3 times the weight they are. So I'm started sucking and breathing hard and trying to go up the ridge. And I thought I was going to lead them. They took off and left me. And I remember getting to the top of the ridge, and I was wheezing, and I said, "Ridge secure." And it wasn't because of anything I did. This group were hardened fighters from the Soviet time, and they knew what they were doing. It was pretty cool.
So after this whole initial push into Afghanistan, and I mean you were involved in it for quite a while, what were the next subsequent years like as you were in and out of Afghanistan?
Well, so I didn't go. Well, for me, I actually jumped on another agency team for Operation Anaconda and did that.
Okay.
And then left. I was the last guy in 5th group to pull out of Afghanistan, and went back to headquarters. And I had been asked for by the agency by name this time to be detailed to a Middle Eastern country to do some pre-Iraq preparation of the battlefield stuff there. So there's a lot of paperwork to do to prep for that. So I went home in April of 2002 took some leave, and then started having to travel to get all the clearances and visit the places I need to visit to get detailed to the agency. So that late after the summer, I wound up being assigned to the agency for 2 years. So that was 2002, and I was brought there to do this sort of cross-border thing, to do the tactical side of that. In the run-up to the agency was collecting some information and running some low-level people, and you had to negotiate. The assets had to negotiate Iraqi security, and then there was this little problem with the UN. The UN no-go zone where Americans weren't supposed to be either, and it had been run by Kuwaitis before, untrained cops with 38 revolvers, and they got hit in an ambush. They were set up by a turncoat, and they got ambushed, and a couple of them killed. That's when they decided they needed some experience on the tactical side to come in and take over that part. So I was working with a small group of Kuwaiti policemen, and there was a case officer in charge.
And you were just like doing operational preparation of the battle space before.
Yeah, my job was just. Yeah, my job was to sneak in, past the UN. We had some interesting times where UN troops would come. It's an open desert, so use different techniques in an open desert. And I know we were up in this tower once, and suddenly some UN guys stopped in there, and I'm up in the tower. I remember taking me and the other guy took the other American took our boots off to creep down this metal spiral stairway, and they were joking and laughing in this other room with, I think it was Dutch soldiers from the UN, and we went creeping by the door to get out, and it was kind of, these were cops, so it was kind of like herding goats. They didn't know what they were doing, but they had some guns and they thought they were bad. So I had to keep everybody close enough that I could put hands and push somebody, pull somebody, or kick somebody to get them to do what I wanted to do. At least I thought that was the thing. I was the big badass SF guy. One time my hubris got me into a little bit of trouble because at the border between Kuwait and Iraq, there's this 15-foot deep, 15-foot wide trench and a berm. It was a tank barrier. The person that we had recovered that night, my job was to get them in and get them to a place where agency people could debrief them and task them.
Is that an asset?
Yeah, an asset. And they were like low-level smugglers. And then my job would be to get them back into Iraq. So, yeah, this guy had been lost for several hours down in this ditch. And
oh my God.
So the senior policeman said, "Oh, I know a place. I live here. I know a place we can get him back across easy." I'm like, okay. So we go, and I didn't see that it was some places it was eroded down, but this place was not eroded. But he said it's the dirt is stiff enough he should be able to climb. Well, we held this guy by the arms and dropped him into this hole, and I'm watching through. I'm the only one with NVGs, and I'm watching him struggle and struggle and struggle to try to climb out on the other side, and he's not getting anywhere. And after a while, I'm like, an Iraqi patrol is going to stop by here anytime. And we're sitting here watching this. And I was like, these guys are all idiots, but I'm a badass. And not only that, and not only am I a badass, I am experienced rock climber. I climb buildings in Delta. I know what I'm doing. So I said, I'll get him back out. And I had the guys hold me by the arms and drop me down in this hole. I go over, put the guy on my shoulders, get him up, go back to get out. I went to a place where there was a 90-degree corner to try to climb out. And guess what? I couldn't get out. And now I'm like, oh, wait a second. I'm stuck in this hole and everybody's up there and the Iraqis are here and I can't get out. And I'm supposed to be the guy that's the mature, experienced guy. And I think I was thinking about, oh my God, this is going to be hard to live because eventually a patrol is going to come by. I'm going to get captured. I didn't think they'd kill me. I said, but I'm going to get captured. And when I'm released at the end of the war, I'm going to have to explain that I was captured because I got stuck in a hole. Yeah, I was worried about that, but we thought about it, and the other American had these hiking boots on, so had several guys undo their boot laces and tie them all together and made a line, and I was able to make a loop in the line and get enough that I could get 1 foot enough where I eventually got out of that predicament, as we'd call it, I guess.
And the smuggler?
I had gotten him back on the other side, so he was good to go, and we got. But the first thing I did after that was buy a collapsible ladder that I carried to the border with me every time. After that,
I was once detained by the Kurdish secret police, who they alleged that I scrambled across that berm from the Syrian side into Iraq. Now, there's never any proof to substantiate such claims, but that I spent a night in their jail, which was a fun experience. But yeah, those berms are no joke.
Well, that's interesting that you got to spend the night in the jail.
Yeah.
Later.
So you're doing the agency detail, and then the war kicks off.
Yeah, the war kicked off. I went in, and it was, just a lot of interesting stuff. I went in. The former COS of Iraq was sitting in Kuwait, and he had his GRS detail that was going to take him back in, Charlie. And I forget what happened, but his detail, he was going to go in from Saudi, and Iraq was still going on. I think the battle was had moved to Najaf at this point, and they, for whoever decided in the agency, he was going to go in and get a look, go forward and meet up with a guy named Greg V that was running the show from inside Afghanistan at the time. I mean, Iraq at the time. Greg V and I were lieutenants together in 2nd Recon Battalion.
Oh wow! Okay, I didn't know that.
I didn't.
Well, no, I have asked him to come on the show before. I'm still working it. I hope I can convince him one day.
Yeah, well, Greg and I were lieutenants together, and I didn't see him again till 2002 Afghanistan. And the agency guy I was the tactical leader for, liked me, and he said, "Hey, you need to join the agency. Let me take you and introduce you to somebody." And I went. Of course, we all had beards and civilian clothes. There's this guy, bearded guy, taking a nap. He stands up. He goes, "Oh, Gary Harrington, A Company, 2nd Recon Battalion, 1983." I was like, "Whoa, you agency guys must do your homework." And he said, "I guess you don't remember me." And no, I didn't at the time, again, because we all had quite different look than we did as young Marines. And then after that, we renewed our friendship, and then we worked together in Iraq.
That's cool.
And So yeah, well, but Charlie Siddell or Charlie didn't have his detail, but they said, hey, this guy Gary, he knows what he's doing. He can take you into Iraq. So they said, hey, will you do it? So yeah, I by myself on a helicopter took him into Iraq and for his tour and back out. I went in and out of Baghdad. The agency let me do things that you should be an agency certified, farm certified person to do, but they decided I could do it. So they gave me a few little tests, and so I was running some assets in Baghdad in the area. I was in Baghdad once and hooked up with a SEAL. We were looking at doing a hit on a terror cell that was located by the Shia mosque. It was a shrine, and this is just right after Baghdad fell. So the Shia were very happy and exuberant. And we wanted to get eyes on, so we had this rusted Toyota Corolla cruiser that we were in. And I'm driving, so we kept trying to get through, and the road was blocked off as we got close. So I'd back off, go around, try to come in again. Oh, the road's backed off. So finally, I found a drainage ditch behind the shrine, straddled it with the car, eased through there. And, it was hard going, but I got through there. But as we rounded the corner of the building into the square, suddenly we happened on tens of thousands of Iraqi Shia. And they were having it's their first Ashura since the fall.
Oh, man.
And suddenly we're in it, and I couldn't back up. It was with the ditch and where I couldn't back up. And then just a wave, but right before the wave of people came on us, it's grab the camera off the dash, pull the camera down, take off your shirt. We had outer shirts on, cover up the rifles. And, there's nothing you can do when you're in that sea of people. You can't run over enough or shoot enough to get it out. And people would be plastered on us. And, hey, my big soldierly act was to look at people and smile and go, I'm just a dumb American. And and they glare at you, then they go, okay. And a guy would move you a few feet. Then you'd renegotiate with the next and the next and the next. I think it took us 30, 45 minutes to get out of that crowd.
My God. Whoa.
And out, and I just kept picturing, getting ripped apart by people.
Well, there's that famous case study about the surveillance team that was, I believe it was an IRA wedding.
The IRA.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they got
an
mobbed.
IRA wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it's a funeral, maybe.
No, it was a funeral, and I think we had talked about that in Delta, and those guys, were doing surveillance and got made and pulled out of the car and killed.
Yeah.
That went through, that exact incident went through my mind. I mean, we were there. Yeah, but hey, it was different. We had, some adventures and had fun. I had kind of made my bones with the agency, so they were supportive of me trying to come into the agency. And I finished my 2 years as a detailee in 2004, and had been running back and forth to Iraq. During the day I'd be at the embassy like everybody else. And guess who else came to the embassy and was assigned there? John Mulholland again. He was working at I think it was the OMA office there. So we got to see each other again and work together a little bit. And so the agency supported me. I came back to the U.S. Fifth group had changed significantly. All the people were gone. They gave me a barracks room over the gym for 2 weeks, and I just hand carried my paperwork and punched out of the Army. against advice, and I didn't do all the proper things you're supposed to do when you retire. But I was, by that time, well, I was in my 40s, 46 maybe, and the agency had a job, for me, and I was like, I can't. This is my chance. If I wait, I'll miss it. So I left Fort Campbell on a Friday and reported for work Monday at Langley.
Wow. And what was the
Took
job?
terminal leave.
What was the job they had lined up for you?
Well, the job, I'd been promised, hey, case that I'd become an operations officer, case officer.
They'd
formalize
you.
Yeah, and that I'd already recruited and all that stuff for the agency, and but then I got there and they go, oh, you can start out as a GS-11 and you can't be an operations officer. You're going to be a SOO, a support officer. And I was like, huh? What? Wait a minute. Did me? Support officer? And they said, well, you're going to have to do that for a while. And so I showed up with the Near East Division, and that was my job, to sit at a desk and support Iraqi ops, write cables. And I did that. I did everything I could. I'd been fortunate from the time I was in Yemen to Kuwait, doing, an army project, to when I was detailed. And throughout that time in the war, a lot of agency people, I met a lot. And a lot of them depended on me to take care of them in the hostile environments. So, yeah, I guess I had friends on the inside, and they were telling me, you're going to have to do 2 years before you can even be considered to do the training to get certified as a case officer. And I'm like, but I already recruited. And,
yeah.
And they go, that doesn't count. And, well, I wound up after 6 months there getting my opportunity to go to the course to get certified. So I did that, and we're talking 2005. And then I said, because I chose to go case officer route instead of ground branch.
Right.
Because, I was trying to look ahead. I was in my 40s. I was still great shape and very capable. But I was like, I got to do this till I'm 65 or so. And I don't want to be that guy, white-haired guy, trying to still tote the rifle and hang out with the badasses.
Right.
And if I'm a case officer, I can have I've never had, for the last 15 years, I haven't had a regular life. I can have a regular life and still contribute. So I went that route and had made them promise me that, hey, I've done a lot of war stuff for you guys. Now I want one of those embassy jobs. I want to go to Geneva or somewhere where I can have a good time, live a good life, and all that. And so I was set to go somewhere. It was not Geneva. It was Saudi Arabia. So, but it wasn't
a case officer job.
It was a case officer job. And then after I graduated the course, the day I graduated, the division's personnel officer sent me a note. Congratulations on graduating the course. He said, please come by my office at your earliest convenience about your assignment. So I showed up and I said, hey, and he goes, no, you're not going there. And I go, well, what am I doing? Well, there's a dire need in Afghanistan and they need you and they asked for you. So you're going to Afghanistan.
Oh, my God.
No, I can't, not me back to Afghanistan. And they go, yep, Afghanistan. It turned out it was the Greg V guy was the chief, and had some people that backed out of assignments. I still had the soldier in me where I thought, when you're told you have to go somewhere, you can complain and you can say, ask them to reconsider. But you still have to go. I didn't realize, no, that's not how it is.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the CIA is that, like, you're not a soldier. They can't order you to go to a war zone if you don't want to go.
But I didn't know that really. So I was like, okay. But and I went, and it turned out it was Greg, you know, and you know, I respect him a lot, and trust him a lot, and he really wanted me. So I was happy to work with him, and I worked with him, and you know, he was towards the last half of his tour there. So he left and was replaced by the guy who had been a team leader that I was, a guy named Chris, and I was, had been his tactical team leader in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So between the two of them, now I'm a case officer, but they knew me with my military skills. So I sort of went by, they gave me sort of a different set of rules than the other case officers had. So I guess I had more freedom of movement and more leeway at pursuing some different kind of, you know, it wasn't the usual embassy stuff. You know, I was going after IED people, and I was, for a while, I was meeting a guy that would bring IED trigger devices from Pakistan in, and I would meet him and give him a little bit of money, and I'd take the devices
Off his
instead.
hands. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after a while, it was funny, I got called into the headquarters, and they said, hey, we have like especially trained explosive people that should be getting these. I go, what are they going to do that I'm doing? And, you know, I was a breacher. I've been trained a breacher. I know I can take a triggering device. And they said, no, but you're not qualified. And, you know, it works differently in the agency about your qualifications and stuff. So, but I did that. I did some stuff where I convinced some Taliban that they were on the wrong side of the fence and they should do some other things. I did a couple of the, you know, traditional case officer recruitments and hirings and all that.
You also mentioned to me that there are a few stories from this time frame that you cleared through the PRB that I'd love to hear if you can tell.
Yeah, well, one of them, yeah. So I did do some stuff with Taliban and turn in some Taliban. One of the stories that, an interesting one, is that I was standing on a corner in Kabul called Masood Circle. It's right by where the U.S. Embassy was, just outside the security zone. And I might have been breaking rules, and I'm standing on the street corner with an interpreter, waiting to meet an Afghan that I want to take back an interview. And, you know, while you're standing there, your situational awareness is really turned on. You're scanning, you're looking, you know, if there's anybody going to try to come up and try to kill me, I'm watching. And as I'm doing that, while we're waiting, my attention for a brief moment went on this, off to my left, a black Toyota Corolla. But I was like, okay, well, I don't really see anything wrong with that. And back, and, you know, I was keeping scanning, but then I kept turning back to that black Toyota. Well, then I noticed, well, there's two guys in it, and they see me. We're about 30 yards apart, so they clearly see that I'm an American. And then I, you know, but I was ignoring that little sixth sense that comes on in you, because I was trying to get something done, right? So I just kept making excuses. There was a cop about 10 yards away from that car. And I told myself, well, if there was something wrong, the cop wouldn't let them be there. Because I thought, I'm just bothered because cars don't normally park there. And, well, then the guy that I was waiting for showed up. So we turned around. The interpreter and I went back through the security zone. It's about 150 meters to the gate. And we went in. And as we were coming in the gate, you know, there was just a deafening explosion and the ground shaking. And the alarm went off. You had to get inside the buildings and get on the floor and wait. We were probably there a couple hours. Things started dying down. I went to see the regional security officers there that run security for embassies. And I asked them, I said, hey, was that a vehicle, a VBIED? And they said it was. Was it at Kabul Circle or Massoud Circle right out here? It was. It hit a U.S. military convoy, killed 2 soldiers, injured 4, and killed a bunch of Afghans. And I said, was it a black Toyota Corolla? And the guy stopped me. He said, nobody knows that. We're just finding pieces of that. Nobody knows that. I said, well, I was there 2 minutes before it went off. There were 2 guys in it. So that's just one of those stories that happens. The lesson I took from that was pay attention to your instincts. And if something's bothering you, you need to definitively rule it out, threat or not threat, but be definitive about it. Don't let it sit there, because I've many times imagined the conversation those guys had, hey, let's just do it now. Here's an American right here. All we have to do is touch the wires together. And maybe the other guy, well, no, they told us military convoy. But who knows if that's going to come? Here's one right now. And they didn't. The pictures that went around the world of that explosion, aftermath, where I was standing was just gone. It was obliterated. The tree, so everything was just gone. So, fate was with me that day, even though I probably made some bad choices about sticking around. Yeah.
And then there's another one about asset recovery.
Yeah, so I had some success with a couple ops I did with ground branch guys, where we flipped some Taliban. We actually got some Taliban fighters that we did some stuff, with for a while. And as a follow-on to that, there was one of the guys that was on the top 10 list, Mullah Kabir, that was in Pakistan. And through some people, I'd been trying to reach out to him to make overtures that if he would come in and or cooperate with me, I'd try to get him off the list of that means death, because hey, if we can get you, we're going to kill you, but maybe there's another option for you. And eventually, and I'd had some success doing some those ops, and we were told that he would come in, but he was going to do so at the border of Nangarhar province and Nuristan province. And that was back in those days, we're talking 2006, I believe. Mm-hmm. It was no man's land. It was bad. I think later, a big U.S. military unit got shot up pretty bad there. So we did this op. So it was some ground branch guys and we rolled into thin-skinned vehicles in the middle of the night to get in. And we had 2 gun trucks, so pickup trucks that had the local Afghans that the agency had trained, remained like 30 minutes behind. And our thinking, because we didn't have any air support, was that if we got hit, we would call in those vehicles, and with a 20 or 30 minute delay, they could get in and provide some extra fire support to extract us. And we didn't plan on being there long. You can make an infill at night, but in a village or out in a remote place, unlike the SEALs in Lone Survivor, that you're going to be made and you have to get out of there. So you can get in, but the fuse is burning, so you don't have long to be there. As it started getting light, we backed up into, I found some guy, and we paid him some cash that he had a walled compound, so a mud walled compound. We were able to get our vehicles there, but you know that we're still going to get you. You can't be somewhere, and as the village wakes up and people start moving around, you know you're essentially made. Well, this Mullah Kabir didn't show. I had an Afghan general with me wearing plain clothes who was ethnic Pashtun from that area. And he, after we had no phone coverage, even Thoraya at that point, it wasn't where we couldn't hit satellites, wasn't working. So we're getting to the point where I'm going to have to abandon this mission. And we, the general decided to go forward because he's a local. He can blend. So he said, I'm going to go forward. And we were at the edge of Afghanistan. So by going forward, he was going into Pakistan. And I gave him 45 minutes. I said, okay, I can give you 45 minutes. Go see what the deal is. Get where you can make a phone call and see if this is on or not. But we got to get out of here. The 45 minutes went by. He wasn't there. And we had to try to, I've got to do something. By now, it's getting 10:30. Surely everybody knows we're there by now. So I know that by now, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, whoever knows. And the question is, how soon can they take action? And, I wanted to pull out and take the Americans with me because that's the sure thing to do. And that's what the agency would want me to do. That was the politically correct thing to do. But then there's that soldier's creed of never leave a guy behind. And I even asked myself the question is, well, is he my guy or is my first responsibility to the Americans?
Right.
And then this guy's an Afghan. And the ground branch guys were asking me, it's my call. What are we going to do? And I talked with them a little bit, and we decided, okay, it's no longer a secret that we're here. Let's make one effort to get this guy. So we called up the 2 gun trucks, the 2 pickup trucks. So we had 12 Afghans, and with each vehicle was 1, if not 2 other ground branch guys. So we waited on them. They come rolling in. We got in front of them in our thin-skinned vehicles, and off into Pakistan we go, looking for this general. And we got lucky that after we got inside and had gone just a few kilometers, suddenly this little car comes flying up behind us, and out jumps the general, and he's like crying and running up and hugging me. And he had his vehicle had stalled near a Pakistani checkpoint, and they'd fired a couple times, and then he'd been running for the last 45 minutes.
Oh, geez.
So he was glad, but we recovered him. And then, thanks to the ground branch guys, skill and the guys that they had trained, we, mounted up and got back out, and with no incident. It was it was just a very tense time. It had reminded me that, when I talked earlier about Afghanistan 2002, I was the tactical leader, and that Chris guy that I talked about later was the team leader, and we got set up out in the middle of nowhere for this asset that was going to meet us, and he wasn't showing. And as a tactical leader, I noticed that, hey, we're out in the middle of a valley. We're in a bad spot. The people in this little outpost, there's only like 5 little buildings together, are disappearing. If the locals are disappearing, something is getting ready to happen. So I told him, we've got to pull out. We can't stay here. And we left. And after we got back that night to our base camp, we found out that SIGINT had picked up Al-Qaeda comms saying that they had part of the ambush in on us, and were waiting to put the rest of it in before they initiated an ambush. But we ended up, walking out. And I just thought it was a weird sense of irony that I'd been on one side and now here I was in the team leader job. And I like it better being on the tactical side.
Was that sort of like emblematic of your time at the agency that they kept you in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I did 3 tours. It's supposed to be 1, and not that many people even did 1. And I did 3. After 2, I would have been able to go, but I went home on leave and actually married somebody in the agency, and she had never done a war zone tour. So he said, well, you've done your share of war zone, but she's not done a war zone, and she's going to be in a war zone. So if you want to be with her, because we've been in separate countries, married in separate countries for a year, it's going to be a war zone, Iraq or Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I was like, hey, I've already got everything wired here in Afghanistan. I'll stay in Afghanistan. So she came out, and I did my 3rd year. It was maybe not the wisest choice I made, because I didn't realize that after all those years of war zones and classified missions, just back to back to back to back, you don't realize what it does to you. Yeah. And I'm now in touch with some of the GRS global support guys that were bodyguards that knew me and trusted me. In those days, they said, hey man, that 3rd year, and we all wondered when you were going to buy the ticket, because like you're going out on your own in Kabul and driving by yourself, right? And staying at a compound, and you kind of had this thing of nobody can touch you, and he goes, most people don't survive that, right? And, but I did, and yeah, it was good, but I was done with war zones. I thought. So. I want to ask about kind of your transition out of the agency, but I'm going to hit you with a couple some questions from our viewers, and let me see if I can pull these up here real quick. I know we have a handful. Let's see here. Tomes asks, how does the agency have to adapt to penetrate harder targets like nation-state actors, China and Russia, as opposed to our GWOT experiences? And what from our GWOT experiences can be learned as far as like how we go? I guess I think this is a little convoluted, but I think what he's asking is how can we take our experiences in the GWOT and sort of like rejigger that to target nation states and some of the near peer adversaries that we're in competition with? Well, that one, to be honest, that's probably a few levels above my pay grade. I think that my opinion, based on what I know, is the intelligence services have had a very hard time in our near peer countries. I don't want to go too far in what I say, but I think we're all aware that we've had some spectacular failures regarding China and some other countries. And so a lot of our thinking about how the intelligence service goes about it, I think, has to be refigured. And the model that we use in Afghanistan would not work. Now, I don't know what the special forces, whether first group or 10th group with Russia, planning is for, to take their side of the battle to those countries. But I don't think it can't be the same like command structure as it was in Afghanistan. And one of the big failures, I was one of the plank holders as things started deteriorating with Syria. And so I was in the midst of the decisions as that was ramping up. And based on my experience, I knew that whatever we did in Syria, and I'll draw the correlation to a near peer country, that like Afghanistan, while the agency might start it and have the legal authorities under covert actions to do these initial activities, that it's going to inevitably turn over to fifth group. Mm-hmm. So my thinking was, at the beginning, we need to share with SOCOM and SOCCENT and be tied in so that it's a seamless transition from agency to Army. And but that's where you get into those organizational divides and jealousies, because they're like, no, you can't eat. And I was like, well, let's go tell them. And there was great reluctance to share much. I went down for my boss and I went down to brief General Mattis, and that did not go well at all.
Oh my God.
Well, it was General Mattis is a very, very smart man, and at that, and we're used to doing military briefs, so that's one advantage we have. Well, then I came back, and a few months later, it was time to go to SOCOM, and we'd had the agency and SOCOM had some difficulties, and there was a level of distrust there. And I was like, so and by this time I'm a GS 13. That's it. I'm a low level GS 13 because I've done all most of my time in war zones. I did have one tour somewhere else, and I had some, successes in the terror arena there. But so I said, hey, if anybody wants to go with me, any flag level person wants to go down to SOCOM, you're welcome to. But nobody came. So I walked into Admiral McCraven's office by myself, and it was an ambush. He was not happy with the agency, and one of his key staff members had there was a big rift. I went there. His briefing table everybody was there. They introduced themselves. They sit me down. Then the door to his office opens. He comes in, sits in his chair, facing them, says hello. Then he spins it and looks at me and goes, "And what do you want?" And I was like, well, here I am, former E7 now, talking to the SOCOM commander.
Oh,
and I said, hey, sir, I at heart, I'm an SF guy, and I'm here, but I'm going to tell you the truth, not only about what we have and what we're doing, but more importantly, what we don't have and what we can't do. And we got along. It sort of helped that John Mulholland became his deputy, and we were friends, and, I got some assistance from him, and, off we went. But as that relates to a near peer, that there has to be a seamless off ramp. Mm-hmm. And, I guess maybe that's changed since I left in 2015. I doubt it, just because of legalities and jealousies, and everybody's got to protect their turf.
Joe asks, what is your view of oil and gas exploration in Yemen and its impact on the government and economy there? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Hey, Yemen has a lot of oil, and it's just that the rift between the Shia and Sunni there, we're never gonna get that. The French, I can't remember now the name of the French oil and gas company that had the big concessions there back during 98, 99. It doesn't matter who has the concessions and consortium there. They are not going to resolve that issue. Mm-hmm. No. And it's never going to be stable enough where anybody's going to be able to really put the infrastructure that it needs to be there to be able to take advantage of it.
Mitchell asks, what was the most useful thing you learned at Marine Corps boot camp? And I guess he's asking that helped in your later role in JSOC and CIA. Please tell us it somehow involved scrubbing toilets with toothbrushes.
Well, yeah. Well, involving toothbrushes. Hey, it's shoot, move, and communicate. It's the basics of never leave a buddy behind. It's the belief in your country and in your service and devotion to those people around you. It's the basics. And the Marine Corps, I felt, was really good at the basics. And no matter where you go in JSOC, CIA, whatever the most complicated operation you're doing, even, I've done operations against top tier Al Qaeda leaders. It's still going back to the basics. Mm-hmm. Taking care of people, shoot, move, communicate.
This is sort of maybe an open-ended question, but Isaac asks if you have an opinion about what we've heard about in the press about the Havana syndrome.
Yeah, I don't know about that. When I first heard it, I thought it was plausible. It's also plausible to me that it could be another or a manifestation of anxieties. This is our society today is walking around with a lot of anxieties. And when you're operating in certain countries and you're undercover, particularly if there's hard targets coming after you, that can weigh on you and change you. But to be honest, I do not have enough information, and I think the medical community is still pretty divided on whether, on the reality of that and the impact of it. I would believe if you showed me data, I would believe either way. Certainly, I don't put it past some countries to use a weapon like that against us.
Jose asks, regarding Tora Bora, would you say bin Laden and Al Qaeda had a good understanding of SIGINT intercept capabilities?
I didn't say that Al Qaeda had a good understanding of it. They were intercepting communications coming out of Tora Bora and identified bin Laden's voice on that at certain points. And sometime between 6 and 9 December, they stopped getting his voice. So that's when we know that he, sometime in that time frame, probably left Tora Bora, which happens to be about the night they told us that we had to get off our OP.
Paul asks, do you know if any Afghans you worked with early on were able to get out of Afghanistan, I guess, when the country collapsed? I'm guessing it's hard to prove they worked with us if they worked with the
There's some did, some didn't. There are some people, that I know of that are still there. There's a man, one of the linguists that I worked with, named Rasul, is active in trying to help. There's various groups, and there's a lot of SF guys that help get people out, but there are guys that are stuck.
Yeah.
And it's not, to me, just them, but their family members. There's one person I know that, hey, they're coming around now to my brother, and if it's either join or get killed, and if they ever find out that I'm in America, he's dead. So it's there's a lot. There's so many people that are left, and probably a lot of agency affiliated people.
Yeah. Joe's, I think you kind of answered this question, but he says, do you have a lot of exposure working with SOT-As or TFO during the AFO OPB mission sets? I think you sort of answered that question.
Yeah, I don't. The SOT-As, I coordinated with some of them, like mostly doing peacetime stuff in Kuwait and some of the other places, but not. I didn't really work with them in the combat phase. I pretty much worked with agency people in most of that.
Don asks, with all of your experience working by, with, and through the State Department, do you have any experience or thoughts working with the Diplomatic Security Service, or MSD?
Hey, a lot of great guys work there. There are plenty of guys. There's Rangers, Delta, Marines, every branch of service that some of them leave, mid-career and come to the Diplomatic Security Service. A guy that I trained me in martial arts, used to be their head of their martial arts program, Tony Mofness. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him, but that's the greatest martial artist I've ever known or seen, and he ran the DS program for a long time. So yeah, there's a lot of good guys there, but yeah, there's some that are inexperienced. In Afghanistan, they were experienced, but in places, in some other places that were not hostile, it's people that have more of an admin police type background. So they're maybe not as suited in some respects to deal with a hostile environment.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question before we move on to sort of your transition out of governmental service. I've been working on this article lately with my colleague Sean Naylor for the High Side, that we've learned that the next commander of Delta is actually going to be a aviation guy who comes from Echo Squadron. I was wondering if you had any thoughts of that, as somebody who worked in this community and closely with the community, about rather than somebody who came from the traditional squadron commander position and working their way up, about an aviation guy sort of landing in that billet.
Hey, I think it's time. Delta's changed a lot. I actually, in the Syria stuff, went back to the Delta compound to do a briefing there in the run up to Syria. And when I left, it was 3 squadrons. I came back and there was it doubled in size. I think there was we were at 8 or whatever, a bazillion squadrons, a whole bunch of different missions, and it had grown. And so with that, I believe that the guys that have to develop the operational plan on the ground, there'll still be plenty of people that can do that. But to run that behemoth now, I think that anybody that has the proper mentality and training and experience in a joint environment is very capable of doing that. So I don't think that they'll miss a step.
So talk to us. I mean, I believe you told me you spent about 15 years in the agency before retiring. If you could tell us a little bit about your transition back to civilian life after all these years and a life of working, sort of in the shadows.
The agency, I entered this field. I was a young guy. I thought my job was to give my life for my country, and never planned on surviving all that stuff and getting old, getting older. I pushed hard, and I had that just some things in the agency started, bothering me somewhat. I had a successful operation against a senior Al Qaeda person that sort of put me in the middle of the political aspect and at more senior levels. And I started seeing under the tent, that some of the politics involved and the decision-making process and some stuff with the National Security Council and, this whole thing about, hey, let's not tell SOCOM stuff. I started becoming like, hey, it's bothering me. And I think and then the wife that I married there in the agency decided to move on and do something different. So, I started really wondering, like, what am I doing here? I felt that the agency, a lot of the people in the side of the agency I was in were fairly liberal, and that, I was viewed somewhat different. I don't think I was an old codger yet, but it just started getting where I started, like, I don't like the politics in this. And then in my personal life, I'd been on all these offensive things. It's how do we track down this guy? How do I get this guy? I had a few times where I did something I felt was really good, like getting a family out of a denied country once. That was a good feeling. And I started searching for it, and there was a spiritual search for me. I'd been a believer in God and Christian, but I sure as heck wouldn't have been accused of that if anybody knew me in a lot of my military time and maybe agency time. And I started having medical issues. I'd been under extreme stress in some things that we haven't talked about, probably shouldn't talk about. And for so many years and so long that I started having heart things, and I started thinking this isn't for me. And right when my career, after some pretty spectacular successes, should have been taken off, I was like, I've got to bail on this. And I resigned in 2015 after I think I was 11 as a staff officer and 2 as a detailee. But I've been working on and off with the agency for 15, 16 years.
And so you sort of reconnected or made stronger connections with your faith. Got remarried.
No, I actually with my faith, I hope I don't turn
no, it's
people
okay.
off, but I decided I needed to be not a believer, but a follower. I needed to be somebody that made who I thought I was on the inside and what I believed be who I am, how I speak, and on the outside, because I was one thing that I felt I needed to be to get the job done on the outside. And I thought I was somebody different. The truth is you are who you are on the outside, not what you like to think you are on the inside.
Sure.
So I did reconnect with my faith. I decided I probably wasn't the most qualified person to look for romantic entanglements. All my buddies in the military say, "Hey, Gary, every 10 or 15 years, don't ever get married again. Just every 10 or 15 years, give all your shit to some woman and all your money, and don't go through that whole legal
just PayPal them."
So, but part of my change and my faith, I gave up on all that. And then I was at a church in McLean and, met somebody there that was, I get a godsend, to me. I give it up. I was like, okay, I'm not looking anymore. And Kimberly Scott walked into my life. And so we've been together like 8 years, and it's funny because I had just rolled back my cover in preparation to leave the agency. And we agreed to have coffee to talk about church. So I met her for this coffee, and she said one of her first questions, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, you're actually the first person I can tell that I work in the CIA." She goes, "Oh, and she is a very sweet and innocent person, besides what little bit of corruption I've been able to achieve." And she said, "Oh, what?" I said, "Well, I actually was a Marine officer to start off, but then I resigned and I enlisted in Special Forces. And then I did this thing that they call the Delta Force for a while. And then I went to the CIA, and I'm in the CIA." She said, "Oh." And she goes back to school, and some friends of her, she had a husband, a late husband who passed away a few years before of an illness. And they'd been trying to set her up with agency guys because this teacher that she worked with, her husband was a senior guy in the agency. And they were trying to set her up. She's, "No, I there's a guy at my church, and I think I'm going to start going out with him." And they, oh, tell me about him. And it happened to be that this woman's husband had been a ranger, and before the agency, she said, "Oh, well, his name is Gary. He was Marine, then he was Special Forces, then he was Delta Force, and now he's CIA." And then the woman looked at her and laughed and shook her head and patted her on the back and said, "Oh, honey, there's nobody that's done all that stuff." That's the kind of thing that guys tell girls when they want to get very friendly with them. But there's no way. She said, "But he seems so sincere, and I met him at church." She said, "Nah, impossible, but give me his name, and I'll have my husband check him out." So she gave him my name, and she said, I found out much later that a couple of days later that the lady came back to her and said, "Oh my God," she said, "not only is that true, there's way more than that. He's done all that and then a few things." So
you passed the smell test.
I passed that. They did give a little bit extra report. They said he's known as a real good guy, but he's not much of a rule follower. But he never lies. So, when he gets caught, he'll tell them what he did. But so I guess I passed that test.
And so how has quote unquote retirement been going for you and settling into this new life?
Well, I think maybe all of us can relate to that, right? It's way, way tougher than I thought.
Yeah.
And I like, even in the agency, I got used to, we're government, and I want to do good things. And when I was in the government, if I write a proposal and get a proposal and convince people to approve the proposal, I get money. Like my last year in Afghanistan, $1 point whatever million to set up this program. It was a very successful program. It was great. So I thought, okay, I'm going to apply my skills to business and do that. Well, guess what? There's not a bunch of people lining up to give me millions of dollars to start a business. And at first, I think I got pushed with, by that time, for whatever other reasons, I knew some people in places and they were hooking me up with security gigs. And I was trying to set up a security, and I would hire SEALs and SF guys, but I never made a success of it, because by the time you pay the guys to do the work, there never was enough for me. So I couldn't live off the money. And one day I did an event for women CEOs, where I trained them in anti-assault, anti-abduction, escape from restraints, situational awareness. During that, one of the women came up and said, if I knew this before, I wouldn't have got stabbed and raped a few years ago. And I just liked that. I like giving to people. It made me feel that the 35 years that I spent doing the things that I did in hostile environments, living under cover, that there were things I could teach people that improve every person's life, so they can take care of themselves, so they can have peace of mind. And these days, look how our society is devolving, and violence is right around the corner from any of us, and people are increasingly less able to take care of it. So I kind of view it as a mission to, equip people to be able to take care of themselves, just following the same principles and habits that many of us learn to live with throughout our careers.
You're still doing is this become something you do regularly, these seminars and things like this?
I have in the past tended to work for, higher net worth families and people that have daughters or children going abroad to study. I've been doing some events with organizations, and I'm getting ready to launch an online course called the Prudent Parenting Course. And that's to just take parents and guide them through how to properly mentor your children so that they are self-reliant for their security and safety. It's a pretty extensive course, and I've spent probably 2 years putting that together.
And where can people find you on the internet if they want to hire you to come speak to their group or enroll in one of these courses?
Well, thanks for asking. My website is garyharrington.net, and I'm on Facebook as Gary Harrington, and on Instagram as The Real Gary Harrington, and have a YouTube channel as well.
And Gary, I think throughout this interview, and I'm sorry I kept you way longer than I thought we would. This has been over 3 hours, but I realized we could easily do 2 entire episodes with you, and all these stories and insights you have are amazing. And I hope you'll take me up on the offer sometime when you're coming through New York to come and join us in the studio sometime, because this has been really
Sure.
enlightening and enjoyable.
Sure, man. We'll talk about Coast some other time, and the killing of the CIA officers there.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked to people who are involved in that, and I would love to hear more from you on it as well. Man, thank you so much, Gary.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and again, thanks a lot for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely, man. And for the viewers out there, thank you for joining us tonight. And we will be back on Friday with Dallas Alexander, who is a Canadian JTF-2 sniper. Excited to have him on the show. If you want to find Gary, we'll have his links down in the description, so you can find all his information down there. And Gary, we'll have to do it again sometime, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Thanks for your time. All right, so we'll see all you guys on Friday. Take care out there.